A few hours later, Harry found himself sitting in the library with his friends. He couldn't believe that he had dared to question almost everything that had defined his life as a Hogwarts student. Plus, he understood the true reason why Patrick decided to befriend Sandy Ulrich and Chauncey Barlow. It wasn't just an act of rebellion against Dumbledore. It was because Patrick was actually lonely and needed some friends who weren't Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. "Well, I guess we just got lucky," he said. "Everyone is now questioning the validity of the house sorting situation at Hogwarts. I mean, even Draco Malfoy is questioning why Slytherin is seen as the bad house, especially since practically everyone there has chosen to accept Chauncey as one of their own instead of Gryffindor. And I always thought that Malfoy was conceited," said Candace. "Why did he have a sudden change of heart?" "It's not really a change of heart, per se, but more like I'm tired of how everything is going at Hogwarts," said Draco, his voice clipped, but laced with a surprising vulnerability. "Slytherins are ambitious, sure, but that doesn't mean we're all prejudice-filled bullies. Chauncey might be a bit weird, let's say, but he's fiercely loyal and has a good heart. We wouldn't just turn him away because of a sorting hat malfunction. We value cunning and ambition in Slytherin, but that doesn't always have to translate to meanness or a superiority complex." Harry blinked, surprised by the genuineness in Draco's voice. It was a far cry from the usual Malfoy sneer he'd grown accustomed to over the last few months. Candace, ever the observant one, leaned in, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "So, you're saying Slytherins value different things than Gryffindors?" she asked, a hint of a challenge in her tone. "Maybe bravery isn't the only path to greatness. Maybe there's room for more than one kind of hero at Hogwarts." "Of course there's room for all types of heroes," said Philip with a hint of amusement in his voice. "You really think that Gryffindors are the only ones who take risks, or stand up for what's right, Malfoy?" Draco scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "Hardly. Slytherins just go about it in a more strategic way. We don't always need to announce our intentions to the world before we act." Candace, ever the mediator, chimed in, "So it's about results over theatrics. Like, a cunning plan executed in the shadows can be just as heroic as a Gryffindor's daring charge." A slow smile spread across Draco's face. "Exactly, Thorpe. Gryffindors might be the first ones to leap into the fray, but Slytherins are the ones who make sure there's a fray worth leaping into, and that everyone comes out alive on the other side." Harry couldn't help but offer a grudging nod. He'd never considered Slytherin in that light before. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to their house than meets the eye. Meanwhile, Eleanor took Chauncey aside and said to him, "What exactly did Patrick say to you that convinced you to join him?" "Patrick never said much to me, but I could tell that he was really unhappy," Chauncey said. "And I already know that Ron and Hermione are the reasons why." "Is it because of whatever they said go him to make him have that meltdown that landed him in detention with Professor Snape?" said Eleanor. "Exactly," said Chauncey, his voice rumbling with a hint of hidden anger. "As far as I know, Patrick Harvey has already been through too much, and Ron and Hermione haven't exactly been nice to him. They keep whispering about him behind his back, and frankly, it's getting old." Eleanor's brow furrowed. Whispering? Ron and Hermione weren't usually the types to gossip. They were fiercely loyal Gryffindors, known for their strong moral compass. This news unsettled her. "What kind of things are they saying?" she pressed, genuinely curious and a touch concerned. Chauncey hesitated, his large frame shrinking slightly under Eleanor's gaze. He wasn't used to confrontation, and the attention, even positive, made him uncomfortable. "Stuff about his family, mostly," he mumbled, kicking at a loose stone on the ground. How they're not normal. And that he must be up to something because of it." Eleanor's jaw clenched. Whispers about someone's family were a low blow, even for the sometimes harsh environment of Hogwarts. It reeked of prejudice and ignorance, the very things Gryffindor supposedly stood against. "That's terrible, Chauncey," she said firmly, her voice laced with disappointment. "There's nothing wrong with being different. We all come from unique backgrounds, and that's what makes the wizarding world so rich. And besides, wouldn't you rather be judged on your own actions, not the rumors swirling around you?" Chauncey let out a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing a fraction. "Yeah, I guess so. But it still hurts, you know. Like they don't even want to give me a chance." He looked down at his shoes, a flicker of sadness crossing his large, expressive eyes. Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his arm. "They'll have their chance to get to know the real you, Chauncey," she said with conviction. "And in the meantime, you've got a whole house full of people who do." She winked, gesturing towards the jubilant Slytherins celebrating their newest member. The common room echoed with cheers and claps, a stark contrast to Chauncey's earlier dejection. "Now, come on," she said, her voice brimming with warmth, "let's get you fitted for some new robes. Green looks good on everyone, wouldn't you say?" Chauncey offered a hesitant smile, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. "Maybe. As long as it doesn't clash with my hair." Eleanor chuckled, a plan already forming in her mind. Maybe it was time Ron and Hermione learned a lesson about tolerance and the dangers of judging a book by its cover. Perhaps a friendly chat, or a well-placed reminder of Gryffindor's values, was in order. After all, unity and acceptance were just as important as bravery and daring. A few days later, Willa and Amber were seen in the library. Both of them were talking to Harry. Amber said, "So what led you to bringing up the idea that sorting the students into Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin is causing the problems that the school is currently facing?" Amber inquired, her brow furrowed in curiosity. Leaning back in her chair, she propped the large, leather-bound book she'd been engrossed in against the table with a soft thump. "The houses have been a part of Hogwarts for centuries. It's hard to imagine the school without them." Willa, perched on the window seat nearby, chimed in, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe that's the point, Amber. Times change, and perhaps the way Hogwarts operates needs to change too. If the sorting is leading to more division than unity, then maybe we need to consider a different approach." Harry nodded, encouraged by their willingness to hear him out. "Exactly. We all saw how Slytherin embraced Chauncey, even though the sorting hat placed him in Gryffindor. There's so much more to each of us than what our house is supposed to represent. That may be the reason why I think the school needs to change," said Willa. "Hogwarts is more than just a school where students are sorted based on basic requirements. It should be a place where we learn to bridge those differences. The houses create a sense of belonging, that's true, but they can also lead to prejudice and competition that overshadows the fact that we're all united as witches and wizards." Amber, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, "So you're suggesting we do away with the houses entirely? That seems a bit drastic. But maybe there is a way to reform the system." "Wait," Harry said, a jolt of surprise shooting through him as he recognized hushed voices in the next aisle. He rose from his seat and cautiously approached the end of the bookshelf, his curiosity piqued. He couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. To his surprise, there were Ron and Hermione, deeply engaged in conversation with 3 other students he didn't recognize. One of the students was a tall girl with fiery red hair that cascaded down her back in loose waves. She was gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Across from her sat a wiry boy with round spectacles perched on his nose, who was nodding intently while flipping through a worn copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Sitting beside him was a girl with warm brown skin and sparkling eyes, who was listening attentively, a thoughtful frown creasing her forehead. Harry couldn't quite make out what they were discussing, but the hushed tones and animated gestures suggested a conversation of some importance. He lingered a moment longer, his mind racing with questions. What were Ron and Hermione talking about so intently with these unfamiliar students? Could it be connected to the recent controversy surrounding the Sorting Hat and the house system? A jolt of anger shot through Harry as he eavesdropped on Hermione's tense whisper. "I hate to do this, but I need your help to intervene," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "Harry Potter is out of control, and we need to reel him in before he does something he regrets." Harry's fingers tightened around the worn spine of a nearby book. Intervene. What was she talking about? His mind raced, piecing together snippets of their conversation. Was this about his suggestion to reform the house system? Had they taken it that far, that they considered him a threat? He inched closer, his breath catching in his throat as he strained to hear more. What exactly did they think he was planning? Hermione's voice dropped to an even lower whisper, laced with a hint of desperation. Harry was supposed to go into Gryffindor, just like his parents. But for some reason I don't understand, he ended up in Ravenclaw. It's like he forgot who he is supposed to be, what he should stand for. We can't let him dismantle everything that makes Hogwarts special. Harry's blood ran cold. A shiver ran down his spine, not just from the cold dread that crept into his heart, but also from a sudden draft whistling through a nearby bookshelf. So it wasn't just about the house system anymore, a reform he'd been advocating for with growing conviction. This was about him, about his very identity. Hermione seemed to believe he belonged in Gryffindor, not because of his own merits, or his bravery that he'd proven countless times, but because of his parents' legacy. A surge of rebellion flared up within him, hotter and stronger than when he had faced the wrath of Vernon Dursley. He wasn't going to be anyone's puppet. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and he would forge his own path, even if it meant challenging the status quo, even if it meant defying his would-have-been best friend and confidant, Hermione Granger. The weight of her words, laced with disappointment and a hint of fear, pressed heavily on him. Yet, a new resolve solidified within him. He would decide who Harry Potter was, not a sorting hat, not his parents' legacy, and not even Hermione. "So, what are we going to do about it?" said the fiery redhead, her green eyes flashing with a mix of worry and determination. "We can't just sit here while Harry Potter runs around spreading these dangerous ideas about school unity, and even teaming up with that Draco Malfoy." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft rustle of turning pages from the students around them. Harry clenched his fists, a surge of anger hot in his throat. Dangerous ideas. Fraternizing. He wasn't plotting a coup, he was simply advocating for a more inclusive Hogwarts. Isn't that a bit extreme? The wiry boy with spectacles finally spoke, his voice hesitant. Harry's not exactly advocating for chaos. He just wants to tear down everything that makes Hogwarts what it is, the redhead interrupted, her voice rising slightly. Houses are the backbone of this school, they foster competition, yes, but also camaraderie, a sense of belonging. There are other ways to achieve those things, Victoria, the brown-skinned girl chimed in, her voice calm and measured. Perhaps Harry has a point. Maybe the houses are creating more division than unity these days. Maybe, Victoria Walsh conceded grudgingly, but there has to be a better solution than abolishing the whole system. A new voice cut through the tension, deep and authoritative. There you all are. Having a clandestine meeting, are we? Professor McGonagall, deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, stood before them, her stern gaze flickering between the surprised students. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs. Had he been caught eavesdropping? Or was Professor McGonagall here about something else entirely? Victoria, the fiery redhead, stammered under McGonagall's scrutiny, her previous bravado replaced by a nervous flutter. "Well," she fumbled, her voice laced with apprehension, we were just discussing how Harry Potter shouldn't be in Ravenclaw. I mean, Hermione's rather upset that he, well, ended up there and now he's got these ideas, and started thinking for himself. Thinking for himself? Professor McGonagall's voice boomed, echoing through the library. A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed her features for a brief moment, quickly replaced by her usual stern demeanor. Is that truly such a terrible thing, Miss Victoria Walsh? The redhead supplied meekly. Miss Victoria Walsh, McGonagall continued, her gaze sweeping over the other students. Is it a matter of concern when a student begins to question, or even challenge the status quo? Should blind acceptance be our ultimate goal at Hogwarts? The students exchanged confused glances. Harry, however, felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Professor McGonagall's words, though sharp, held an undercurrent of something else entirely. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't entirely against his ideas for reform. But before he could dwell on it any further, the stern professor spoke once more. If Mr. Potter has brought forth ideas that warrant discussion, McGonagall said, her voice firm but fair, then perhaps a more open forum is needed, rather than hushed whispers in the library aisles. Detention for all of you, she added, her gaze lingering on Harry for a split second, for wasting valuable time and disrupting the peace. My office, after dinner. As the weight of detention settled on them, a strange sense of camaraderie flickered between Harry and the students he'd just eavesdropped on. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events wouldn't be so bad after all. With Professor McGonagall on the scene, a civil discussion about the house system and his place in it seemed inevitable. And who knows, maybe he'd even gain some unlikely allies along the way. But then a nagging doubt lurked in the back of his mind. Hermione's anger and Victoria's hostility hinted at a deeper resistance to change. This wouldn't be a simple conversation. Harry knew he would have to be prepared to defend his ideas against those who saw tradition as an unyielding fortress, not a living legacy that could evolve with the times. Dealing with hostility from the Gryffindors might just be the beginning of a much larger fight for the future of Hogwarts. As Ron, Hermione, Victoria, and the other two students left the library, Harry turned to McGonagall. He had no idea that his speech about unity would result in this type of hostility, and now he was sure that he had saved himself from having to deal with them when he went into Ravenclaw. Why would they feel threatened by me? Harry blurted out, the hurt and confusion evident in his voice. What did I do to deserve this hostility? Professor McGonagall regarded him with a deep look, her eyes twinkling with a hint of something unreadable. Change, Mr. Potter, is rarely embraced with open arms, she said. Tradition, like a comfortable cloak, offers a sense of security, even if it's grown threadbare with time. Those who cling to it often fear the unknown that lies beyond. Her words struck a chord with Harry. He understood clinging to tradition, especially at a place like Hogwarts steeped in history. But was blind acceptance truly the best path? He thought of Ron and Hermione, their potential friendship strained by his ideas. Were they simply afraid of change, or was there something more to their resistance? But surely, Harry pressed, they can see that the houses create more division than unity these days. Isn't there room for something different, something more inclusive? A sigh escaped Professor McGonagall's lips. Perhaps, she conceded. But change requires courage, Mr. Potter. The courage to challenge the status quo, the courage to face resistance, and most importantly, the courage to be misunderstood, even by those you consider your friends. Her words hung heavy in the air, a portent of the battles to come. Harry squared his shoulders, a newfound determination settling in his stomach. He may have ruffled some feathers with his ideas, but he wouldn't back down. Hogwarts, he believed, deserved a system that fostered unity and embraced the unique potential within each witch and wizard. And he, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, wouldn't rest until he, at least, had a fair shot at making that change. How could Ron and Hermione be plotting against you? Eleanor cried out as she, Philip, Duncan, and Harry met in the Ravenclaw common room after dinner. And if they recruited Victoria Walsh, Austin Underhill, and Josephine Hunter to join them, then things aren't looking good for you, Harry. Eleanor's voice echoed through the airy Ravenclaw common room, her brow furrowed in concern. Why are Ron and Hermione plotting against you? She exclaimed, her gaze flitting between Harry, Philip, and Duncan, who all shared a look of worry. Harry recounted the unsettling scene in the library, his voice low and tense. I overheard them talking about me, about my ideas on the house system. They seemed genuinely worried, almost afraid of the changes I was suggesting. Duncan, a thoughtful Ravenclaw with a mop of sandy hair, stroked his chin thoughtfully. It is curious, he mused. Traditionally, Gryffindors value bravery and standing up for what's right. Shouldn't they be the first ones on board with challenging the status quo, especially if it leads to a more united Hogwarts? A wry smile played on Philip's lips, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Perhaps Gryffindor bravery doesn't extend to facing uncomfortable truths, Duncan, he said. There's a certain comfort in the familiar, even if it's flawed. Tradition, like a well-worn cloak, can feel safe and secure, even if it's become threadbare with time. But surely Ron and Hermione wouldn't, Harry began, his voice trailing off as he remembered their strained conversation earlier that day. Ron had confronted Harry about not joining Gryffindor, but Harry firmly told him that Gryffindor was not for him. Hermione also demanded that he start hanging out with them, but Harry, realizing that that would mean he would be following the path expected for him, rejected her request. Loyalty can be a double-edged sword, Harry, Eleanor said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Perhaps their loyalty to Gryffindor tradition, or their fear of the unknown consequences of change, is clouding their judgment. A new voice chimed in, cool and collected. Or perhaps there's more to their opposition than meets the eye, said Luna Lovegood, who had been perched on a nearby window seat, seemingly lost in her own world just moments before. Her pale blue eyes, however, glittered with an unusual sharpness. What do you mean, Luna? Harry asked, intrigued by her cryptic statement. Luna offered a faint smile. Sometimes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the greatest opposition comes not from those who disagree, but from those who fear the unknown consequences of change, even if it's for the better. Those we consider our closest allies might be too entrenched in their own beliefs, or perhaps even harbor hidden agendas, to embrace a new path, no matter how beneficial it might be. Harry contemplated her words, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. The situation was more complex than he initially thought. He wasn't just facing resistance from those who cherished tradition, but potentially from his closest friends, blinded by their own fears and biases. This fight for Hogwarts unity was shaping up to be a battle on multiple fronts. He would need all the allies he could get, both within Ravenclaw and beyond, to challenge the status quo and build a more inclusive future for the school. The revelation that even his friends might oppose him cast a long shadow over their meeting. Yet, a spark of hope remained. In Eleanor, Philip, Duncan, and even the enigmatic Luna, Harry had found a group of understanding individuals who were willing to challenge the established order. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, but the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with difficulty. The question that lingered in Harry's mind was this: would their combined courage and conviction be enough to overcome the resistance and usher in a new era for Hogwarts? Only time would tell.